welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
If you are new here, here's the promise we make to you. We do the heavy lifting so you don't have to.
That's right.
We take a stack of sources, dense academic research, complex philosophical treatises, those books that everyone buys, but then they just sit on the nightstand, and we extract the absolute gold.
We find the mental models, the insights, and the real aha moments, and we deliver them right to your ears.
That is the mission. And today we are tackling a monster of a topic.
We really are. It's a subject that feels incredibly heavy, maybe even a little depressing if you turn on the news.
For sure.
But the way we are going to look at it today is completely different. We are talking about war, peace, and history.
But definitely not the version of history you got in high school. We're doing a deep dive into a very specific chapter. It's titled, Peace, Neither Ink Nor Blood.
It's chapter 14 from a larger work by the author who gave us these huge concepts of the black swan and anti-fragile.
Right. And if you know this author, you know he does not suffer fools gladly. He has let's say, a very particular point of view.
He certainly does not. He's a mathematician, a former trader, and now a philosopher who focuses entirely on risk, probability, and how systems actually work versus how we sit around in universities thinking they work.
That's the perfect way to put it. So the mission for this deep dive is really to challenge your fundamental understanding of how the world stays together or how it falls apart.
Right.
Because we're all raised to believe in what I'll call peace from the top. The idea that peace is something created by, men in suits sitting in Geneva or Washington signing treaties with expensive pens.
Exactly, the bureaucratic peace. The idea that without the adults in the room managing everything from on high, the world would just descend into chaos.
But the source material today argues the exact opposite. It argues that this peace from the top, the ink on the paper, is often a mirage. And even worse, sometimes it's the cause of the conflict.
Which is such a radical idea. The argument here is that real peace-sturdy, anti-fragile peace is peace from the bottom.
From the bottom. What does that mean?
It means it comes from commerce. It comes from daily life. It comes from regular people just trying to buy bread and, not get ripped off in the process.
So it's a complete inversion of the standard narrative. We're essentially asking a very, very dangerous question today.
What is it?
What if the people we pay to resolve conflicts, the diplomats, the pundits on TV, the experts from think tanks, what if they are actually the ones keeping the conflicts alive? What if the helpers are the problem?
That's a wild thought.
There's this hilarious, slightly provocative thought experiment the source poses right at the beginning. It's the hook for the whole chapter, really.
I love this part.
It suggests that if we really wanted world peace, the single most effective policy decision we could make would be to send the entire U.S. State Department on a permanent sabbatical to do pottery.
Or ceramics, yeah. Just get them out of the office.
Right. Just give them some clay, let them make some lopsided bowls, maybe a few ashtrays, and just leave the rest of the world alone.
And the really serious claim behind the joke, is that things would actually improve.
Now, that sounds like a joke, but the logic behind it is the absolute foundation of our discussion today. So let's unpack this. Why would removing the experts help? This brings us to our first big concept. The interventionista.
The interventionista. It sounds like a character from a spy novel, doesn't it?
It does, like someone with a thin mustache.
But the source uses it to describe a very specific and very common type of person in the modern world. This is someone who feels compelled to get involved in other people's affairs, specifically to help.
And on the surface, helping sounds like a virtue, right? We're all taught to be helpers. So why is this person the villain in our story today?
It all comes down to the mechanism of how human systems work. The source argues that if you leave them to their own devices, human interactions, whether it's between two neighbors arguing over a fence or two tribes arguing over territory, they have a natural built-in mechanism for conflict resolution.
A natural mechanism.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop of collaboration and what he calls strategic hostility.
Strategic hostility. I like that term. It sounds like a paradox. What does that look like in practice?
Well, think about two shopkeepers on the same street. They are rivals, right?
Of course.
They might argue over customers, they might run competing sales, that's the hostility, but it's strategic. They also know that if they burn down each other's shops, nobody gets any customers at all.
So there's a limit, a natural break on the conflict.
Exactly. They have to collaborate on some level. Maybe they agree to keep the street clean. Maybe they form a business association. They find a balance because they both have something to lose.
So it's a self-correcting loop. We fight a little, we realize fighting is expensive and painful, so we make a deal.
Precisely. It's organic, it's messy, for sure, but it's stable in the long run. Now, here comes the interventionista. This is the third party, the outsider, who comes in to fix the problem.
A mediator, the experts.
Right. And the source argues that this interference breaks the loop. And the reason it breaks the loop is the central theme of the author's entire philosophy.
Let me guess. Skin in the game.
Skin in the game. We talk about it a lot, but let's define it clearly for this context because it is everything.
Okay, lay it out.
It's about the symmetry of risk. The source references Prologue 1 of the larger work, and he notes that systems only learn through error. Pain is information. If I make a mistake in my own life, say, I invest my life savings in a terrible company, I lose my money.
You feel the pain.
I feel the pain directly. I learned very quickly not to do that again. My error corrects my future behavior.
But if you're a bureaucrat,
Right. If I'm a bureaucrat in a comfortable air-conditioned office in D.C. or Brussels, and I decide that country A should invade country B, or that we should support this particular rebel group, if I am wrong, who suffers?
the people in country A and country B, not you. Your pension is safe.
Exactly. I still get my paycheck. I might even get a promotion for being decisive and active. The error continues, the system doesn't learn, because the person making the mistake is completely insulated from the person paying the price.
There is no feedback loop. The signal is broken.
The signal is totally broken.
Yeah.
And the source is pretty savage about these people. He calls them IYIs, intellectuals, yet idiots.
It's such a brutal label. But he's not just being mean, is he? He's pointing to a specific kind of blindness.
Yes, a specific cognitive deficit. These are people who might have sky-high IQs, Ivy League degrees, perfect resumes, but they lack practical wisdom. They don't understand complex systems. They treat the world like a textbook problem set, not a messy living organism.
And the source speculates that without these IYIs, these interventionistas, many long-standing conflicts might have just burned themselves out years ago.
Like a forest fire that runs out of fuel. Instead, they keep throwing more fuel on it, thinking they're putting it out.
There's this fantastic metaphor in the text about cooks in the kitchen that I think really clarifies this.
Yes, it's perfect. Imagine a very small kitchen. You're trying to cook a delicate, complex meal for your family.
Okay.
Now imagine 10 people squeeze into this tiny kitchen. They aren't chefs. They're, say, food critics from a magazine. And most importantly, none of them have to actually eat the food.
That's the key. They don't have to eat it. They have no skin in the game.
None. So one critic comes over and adds a fistful of salt because, theoretically, salt enhances flavor. Another one cranks the heat up to max because historical trends in French cuisine suggest high heat is efficient.
Someone else throws in a bunch of sugar because he wants to write an article about being a contrarian cook.
Exactly. The result is a complete disaster. It's an inedible, burnt, salty, sweet mess. But the critics, they just wash their hands, write their reviews about the complexities of the modern culinary condition, and go home to a lovely dinner prepared by someone else.
And they leave the family in the kitchen with this disaster they created.
That is the interventionista problem in a nutshell. And to make this concrete, to show it's not just a theory, the source applies this lens to one of the most contentious, difficult topics on the planet, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay, we need to be very, very careful and precise here.
Extreme.
We are not taking a political side. We are not discussing who is right and who is wrong in the conflict. That's not the point of this deep dive.
No, we're strictly looking at the source's analysis of the mechanism of interference. How does the cooks in the kitchen problem play out in this specific tragic context?
Right. The source uses this as a case study for why third-party help so often fails.
The hypothesis the source puts forward is, it's called the let them alone hypothesis.
Which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like.
It conjectures that if you removed all the external pressure, the international diplomats flying in and out, the global press corps, the remote pundits on cable news, the people on the ground would eventually somehow settle the dispute.
Not because they suddenly love each other.
Absolutely not, but for brutally practical reasons.
Because again, fighting is expensive and living is demanding. Life has to go on.
The source breaks down this critical distinction between what people with skin in the game care about versus people without it.
Let's walk through that. What do the people on the ground actually care about?
It's not abstract, it's visceral. They care about putting bread on the table. They care about having good weather for a family picnic. They care about not being humiliated at a checkpoint on their way to work.
Basic human dignity and survival. Can I feed my kids? Can I get to my job without being hassled? Is the power on today?
Exactly. Mundane, but essential. Now, contrast that with the people not on the ground, the people observing from thousands of miles away. What do they care about?
They care about the cause, they care about geopolitics, they care about grand abstract principles with capital letters.
And that disconnect is where the tragedy lies, according to this analysis. The source points out the profound absurdity of this remote rhetoric. You have, historically, leaders of various Arab states urging the Palestinians to fight for these abstract principles. But look at where these advice givers are sitting.
Oh, the visual here is just, it's devastatingly funny and sad at the same time. The source describes these potentates sitting in massive air-conditioned palaces.
Right.
And this is my favorite specific detail. They have refrigerators full of non-alcoholic fermented beverages, such as yogurt.
The yogurt drinks, it is such a specific mundane detail, isn't it? It's not a weapon, it's not a flag, it's a yogurt drink. It paints this picture of absolute cushioned, refrigerated comfort.
It really does. You can almost hear the hum of the luxury refrigerator. So these guys are sitting there, sipping their cold yogurt drinks in the AC, telling people who are living in refugee camps to keep fighting and never compromise on principle.
It's the ultimate asymmetry of risk. You have advice givers who pay zero cost, and advice recipients who pay the ultimate cost with their lives and their children's lives.
And the source outlines this timeline of missed opportunities based on exactly this interference.
Yeah, let's look at that timeline. The argument is that way back in 1947 or 1948, if the locals had just been left to figure it out amongst themselves, the outcome would have been messy, it would have been painful, but it likely would have been better than what we have now, 7 decades later.
But they weren't left alone.
They weren't. The rhetoric coming from thousands of miles away, from people sipping those yogurt drinks, called for extreme maximalist measures, things like throwing enemies into the Mediterranean.
Which is not practical advice from a neighbor who has to live with you tomorrow.
No, it's abstract principle talk from people who don't have to face the consequences of that talk. It's a performance for their own domestic audience.
And then, as the source points out, the situation worsens. You get the 1967 war. And then later, in 1992, you get the Oslo Accords.
And Oslo is the classic example of peace from the top. It was all bureaucratic ink. Lawyers, diplomats, handshakes on the White House lawn for the cameras.
It was a media event.
It was a huge media event, and the source is very, very firm on this point. No peace proceeds from bureaucratic ink.
So if ink doesn't work, what does?
Trade. The source says, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you want peace, make people trade. Or better yet, just get out of the way and let them trade.
Because if I'm trying to sell you shoes,
I have a very strong incentive not to bomb your house. And if I need to buy vegetables from you, I have an equally strong incentive not to poison your well. It forces a pragmatic day-to-day collaboration that grand principles can't.
it's the idea that commerce is the ultimate pragmatic force. It forces you to deal with reality, not rhetoric.
Precisely. But there's a massive distortion in how we even view these conflicts, which leads us to the next section. The source uses a metaphor of 2 planets to explain why the view from the news desk is so radically different from the view from the street. He calls them Mars and Saturn.
I love this analogy. Okay, so Mars versus Saturn. Break it down for us.
It's the difference between how a disconnected pundit views the world and how a real person, someone with skin in the game, experiences it. The pundit, the interventionista, views everything as Mars.
Mars, the Roman god of war.
Exactly. To them, everything is a binary conflict. It's the U.S. versus Russia. It is Iran versus Saudi Arabia. The world is a giant game of risk, a chessboard of nations. They see everything as a series of clashes between these abstract entities.
Okay, so that's the Mars view. What's the Saturn view?
The Saturn view represents the real person's experience. The source implies Saturn relates more to time, to agriculture, to the slow, grinding rhythms of actual existence. Real people are interested in commonalities. They want to go to work, raise their kids, have a life. They aren't interested in sacrificing their existence for a global chess game they aren't even playing.
The source gives a specific and honestly a chilling example of this Mars thinking, involving the State Department and the war in Syria.
It really is chilling. The source mentions that at one point there were voices within the U.S. State Department urging the perpetuation of the war in Syria. Not to win it, not for any humanitarian reason, but to keep the conflict burning.
Why? For what purpose?
To spite Russia. To bleed a rival.
So just to make a geopolitical point against an adversary.
Exactly. From the Mars perspective, the grand geopolitical chessboard, it makes a kind of cold, sociopathic sense. We hurt our rival, we drain their resources. But think about that from the Saturn perspective.
The Saturn perspective is the Syrian family, whose house is being shelled so that some diplomat in Washington can score a point against Moscow.
Right. For the actual people living it, this strategy is monstrous. It treats human lives as pawns, as collateral damage in a game they don't even know is being played. The Mars view completely ignores the human cost because the people making the decisions don't feel the pain.
There's another anecdote about Lebanon that really drives this home. The author lived through the Lebanese War, and he describes this bizarre feedback loop he saw with the journalists covering it.
This is the journalism feedback loop. It is absolutely fascinating. He describes these war journalists arriving in Lebanon during the conflict. Now, you would assume their job is to go out, interview locals, see the reality, get the story from the ground up, right?
What we think journalists do, yeah.
But that's hard. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's confusing. And language is a barrier. It doesn't fit into a neat narrative. So instead, where do they get their information?
From other war journalists who are already there.
Exactly. They congregate at the hotel bar. The Commodore Hotel, it was famous for this. They talk to each other. They trade rumors. They confirm each other's biases. They agree on a narrative that fits the headlines their editors want back home.
So they create this bubble.
They create a parallel world of information that is completely detached from the reality on the ground, a self-referential echo chamber.
And in that parallel world, everything gets, what's the word he uses? Metamorphosed.
Yes. Metamorphosed into a geopolitical problem. The local conflict, which might actually be about a village vendetta over water rights or a trade dispute between two families, it becomes Israel versus Iran, or Christians versus Muslims, or West versus East.
But for the people living through it, like the author, the objective wasn't defeat the West. The objective was make things work. How do I get to the grocery store? Which street do I avoid today because of the snipers?
It is a total and complete disconnect. And this leads to another big error, the source points out, what he calls the Westphalia error.
Ah, yes, the Peace of Westphalia. I feel like I learned about this in 10th grade history and then immediately forgot it. It's one of those terms.
Most people do. It happened in 1648, and it's important because it essentially established the modern concept of the nation-state, the idea that France is a sovereign thing with borders, and Germany is a sovereign thing.
Okay, so what's the error?
The error, according to the source, is that people read too much about the Treaty of Westphalia and not enough about complex systems. We make the mistake of conflating relations between countries with relations between governments.
Oh, that's a huge distinction. We just assume they're the same thing.
We do all the time. We say, America is angry with China. We don't mean every American is angry with every Chinese person. We mean the governments are in conflict. But we talk as if the populations hate each other.
So we confuse the actions of a few hundred politicians with the feelings of hundreds of millions of people.
Precisely. And the source gives this matrix of comparisons to illustrate how wrong that can be. Take countries like Morocco, Egypt, or Saudi Arabia. We're back to the yogurt refrigerators.
The yogurt potentates. I like that.
The governments in these places are technically, geopolitically, pro-peace, or at least have treaties with the West and Israel. So the ink on the paper says they are friends, but the source notes that the populations, the actual people on the street, can be, in his words, conspicuously hostile.
And then you have the complete opposite case, Iran. The government is famously loudly anti-Western. Death to America is part of the official rhetoric. But the source observes that the local population, particularly the educated urban class, is often remarkably pro-Western, pro-American, educated, and tolerant. So top-down peace. The ink says Iran is the enemy and Saudi Arabia is the friend, but real peace, the reality on the ground among the people, might be the complete opposite.
Exactly. And if you're a policymaker and you rely only on the ink, you miss the reality entirely. You are navigating with a map that doesn't match the territory at all.
This distortion isn't just about politics, though. It's about how our brains process information in general, which brings us to my absolute favorite part of this deep dive.
Let me guess. The safari.
The safari analogy, yes. Where are the lions? This section is such a great story, and it's a perfect mental model. So set the scene for us.
So the author is in South Africa. He's in the middle of writing Anti-Fragile, which is a very heavy book about risk and systems. So he takes a break to visit a wild game reserve.
To clear his head.
To clear his head. And like every single tourist who has ever gone on a safari, he has one primary goal.
He wants to see the lions. The main event.
He wants to see the king of the jungle. And he notices this is a universal obsession. All the tourists are driving around in these jeeps, sweating in the sun, bored out of their minds, just scanning the tall grass for one thing and one thing only.
And when they finally see one.
It is absolute pandemonium. Whenever someone spots a lion, they shout, "Kuru!" which is Zulu for lion, and suddenly it's not a peaceful nature reserve anymore. It's a traffic jam on the freeway, jeeps swerving, people hanging out of windows with giant camera lenses.
Kuru, Kuru. It's like they found gold.
It is. And because of this chaos and obsession, the author notes he only saw one lion in the entire week he was there. One.
Okay, so one lion. But meanwhile, what else is actually in the jungle?
Everything else. He describes seeing giraffes, elephants, zebras, wild boars, impalas, more impalas, and he says even more impalas.
Just walls of impalas everywhere you look.
And at the watering hole, the central meeting point, you have hundreds of animals of all different species just hanging out, drinking water together, getting along.
So you have thousands of collaborative, peaceful animals and one predator.
That is the ratio, thousands to one. But, and here is the absolute picker, what dominates the author's memory of the trip? What's the first thing he thinks of?
The lion.
The lion. The majestic calm of that one single predator, not the thousands of impalas.
This is the law of the jungle, completely redefined, isn't it? We always say it's a jungle out there to mean it's chaos and constant murder and violence.
But the real law of the jungle is mostly collaboration with brief moments of violence. Even predators have a kind of arrangement with their prey. They don't just kill for sport constantly, but we make this profound cognitive error. The author admits he made it too. He mistook the lurid for the empirical.
Mistaking the lurid for the empirical. That is a quote to put on the wall. It's so good. We mistake the dramatic, exciting, scary thing for the common, everyday thing.
And there's a very good reason we do this. It's a survival mechanism. It's risk management.
Right. If I am walking through the actual jungle, I should be obsessed with the lion.
100%. Overestimating the probability of seeing a lion keeps you alive. If you ignore the 1,000 impalas, you're fine. They won't hurt you. If you ignore the one lion, you're dead. So for survival, this focus makes perfect evolutionary sense.
But, and this is the big but.
But it is a catastrophic, monumental mistake to use that same instinct to interpret world affairs or history.
Because we look at the news, we look at history, and we only see the lions. We only see the wars, the terrorist attacks, the market crashes.
And we ignore the trillions of peaceful transactions, the billions of people who just went to work, the millions of flights that landed safely. We ignore the 1,000 impalas of peace.
We focus on the one conflict and assume the whole world is burning, when in reality, most of the world, most of the time, is at the watering hole just drinking water together.
Which transitions perfectly into the next section, which is about how this bias completely corrupts the way history is written. The source calls this history seen from the emergency room.
It's another brilliant metaphor.
It really is. Imagine if you tried to write a book describing daily life in New York City, but your only source of information was the emergency room at Bellevue Hospital.
You would think New York is an absolute nightmare, a hellscape. You'd think everyone is constantly getting stabbed, having heart attacks, or falling off scaffolding.
You would only see the trauma. You would have no concept of the millions of people grabbing coffee, walking their dogs in the park, going to the office, falling in love. You would miss 99.9% of normal.
And the source says this is exactly what history books do.
Yes. We suffer from what psychologists call the availability heuristic. We mistake the salient, the noticeable emotional events for the statistical, the frequent common events. And so history books make it seem like states fight by default.
Like war is the natural state, and peace is just a brief, boring break between wars.
When, in reality, history is largely peace, punctuated by lurid, memorable wars. But peace is boring to write about, isn't it?
And then, for 400 years, everyone traded grain and raised their kids and mostly got along. That's not getting you a publishing deal.
Not at all. And the source is pretty critical of the people who write these books. He asks, who writes history? Historians and policy experts.
And he says, let's be polite, they are no rocket scientists.
He's not attacking their intelligence, he's attacking their methodology. He argues they suffer from deep structural biases. They overfit the data. They focus on via positiva what happened. They rarely, if ever, look at via negativa what didn't happen.
Because what didn't happen doesn't leave a record in the archive.
Exactly. Positive results get pressed, negative ones don't. A war leaves behind battle records and treaties. A century of peace leaves behind, well, just life.
There's a specific historical example here that, when I read it, it completely blew my mind. The unification of Italy.
This is such a powerful data point. So the narrative we're all taught in school is this. Pre-unification Italy was a mess. It was unstable, a patchwork of little city-states and duchies that were always fighting.
Right, you think of the Medicis, the Borgias, constant drama and small-scale warfare.
And the standard narrative says that unification in the 19th century brought peace and stability. But the source tells us to ignore the narrative and look at the numbers.
Okay, what do the numbers say?
In the 500 years of that so-called instability, the skirmishes were mostly between professional mercenaries, condottieri.
So professional soldiers fighting other professional soldiers.
Correct. It was almost like a violent sport for nobles.
Yeah.
Very few civilians were involved or killed. But then peace and unity arrive. The modern, stable nation-state of Italy is born. And what happens a few decades later?
The Great War. World War I.
And in that single war, 600,000 Italians died.
600,000.
In just a few years. That is almost an order of magnitude more deaths in the stable period than in the entire 500 years of chaos that preceded it.
So the stability of the large unified state actually created the condition for a massive, catastrophic, unprecedented loss of life.
It's what the source calls the Robert Rubin trade, named after the former Treasury Secretary.
What's that? It sounds like a Wall Street thing.
It is. It's a reference to a specific trading philosophy. The idea is that you have a strategy that makes a tiny bit of money every single day. It looks incredibly stable, very steady, very low risk. But it has a hidden, unseen risk that when it finally blows up, it wipes you out completely.
So you're picking up pennies in front of a steamroller.
That's the perfect analogy. And the source's argument is that the modern nation-state can be a Robert Rubin trade. It looks stable for long periods, but it's capable of generating tail risks, black swans that are far more destructive than the noisy, messy chaos of the past.
So the chaos of old Italy was actually safer for the average person than the stability of the new nation-state.
For the average person, yes, because the chaos released pressure constantly in small, manageable doses. The stability built it all up until the dam broke.
This brings us to the problem of silent evidence.
Yes, journalism is a perfect example. It focuses on events. Man bites dog. It never, ever reports, dog did not bite man today.
Dog was a good boy for the 3,000th day in a row.
That's not a story. But to truly understand the world and its risks, you have to look at the absence of events. The source mentions the Russian school of probability. You have to look at what is absent from the data. Just because you don't see black swans in the historical record doesn't mean the risk wasn't there.
And the source takes a real shot at the academic temperament here. He says you can't learn about risk and the real world just by reading archives in the Yale Library.
No. You need a different kind of mind. He says you need the temperament of a debt collector for the mafia or a pit speculator from the old Chicago trading floors.
Someone who has to watch their back. Someone with real skin in the game.
Someone who understands that if they are wrong, they get hurt, physically or financially. That is a very, very different kind of knowledge from understanding history as a sequence of dates and treaties you read about in a comfortable chair.
So if history books are the emergency room view and treaties are just ink, what is the actual cure? What is the real peacekeeper here?
Commerce.
Money talks.
It's not just about money, though. It's about mutual dependence and shared interests. While the historians are looking at the wars, the lions, the source argues that on the ground, merchants, barbers, doctors, and money changers are creating organic collaboration every single day.
The impelas.
They are the impelas. There's a mention of the Annales School here, a group of French historians who tried to fix this.
Right, what did they?
They tried to shift the focus of history away from the lurid wars and onto the whole life of organisms. Things like crop yields, trade routes, daily life of peasants. But the source notes they ultimately failed to change the mindset of the international affairs experts. We are still addicted to the great power narratives.
But the source gives us some amazing historical examples where this organic peace worked, even when the history books tell us there was nothing but war.
Arabs, Turks, and Byzantines. If you look at the geopolitics of that era, it looks like a constant tug of war, a clash of civilizations. Christians versus Muslims.
That's the headline version? But on the ground.
On the ground, merchants were doing business actively. The source even brings in his own family background here. He mentions his family living as Greek Orthodox Christians under Islamic rule.
But he adds, At a safe distance.
A safe distance from the strict Sunnis, yes. The point is, he witnessed this collaboration. It wasn't a constant state of holy war. It was a complex web of trade and coexistence.
And this leads to my favorite quote of the entire text. It's so memorable. The turban versus tiara principle.
Better the turban of the Turk than the tiara of the Pope.
It's such a catchy slogan. Where on earth does it come from?
It's attributed to a Byzantine official, Grand Duke Lucas Notaras, right before the fall of Constantinople. He was basically negotiating a friendship treaty with the Ottoman Turks.
So just to be clear, he was a high-ranking Orthodox Christian leader, and he was saying he would rather be ruled by the Muslim Ottomans than by the Catholic Pope.
Yes. And it wasn't just him. The source points out that Balkan peasants and local leaders often sided with the Turks against their Catholic feudal lords.
Why? That seems so counterintuitive from a religious perspective.
Because of economics, practicality, skin in the game. It made more sense for their livelihoods. The taxes under the Ottomans might have been better, the trade barriers lower. The source points out that we often invent these elaborate theological rationalizations, oh, it's God's will, to justify what is actually just straightforward economic collaboration.
So they'd rather wear the turban because it meant better business and more autonomy than the tiara, which came with all sorts of feudal obligations.
Exactly. The ideology mattered far less than the ability to feed your family and run your business.
The source comes back to the Lebanon Civil War one last time to wrap this whole idea up. And this is personal for him.
It is. The author lived through the worst of it as a teenager. But he says, except for the areas right there on the Green Line, the active front line dividing the city, it didn't feel like a war most of the time.
That is so hard to wrap your head around if you've only seen the news footage of buildings on fire.
It is, but he says life went on. People went to school, they ran businesses, they fell in love. He says people reading about it in history books will never, ever understand that experience. They will only see the lion. They will only see the explosions and the political manifestos.
They won't see the daily life that continued despite the war. They won't see the commerce that kept people connected even when the ink had dried up and the blood was flowing.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's try to summarize this entire deep dive.
Okay, let's do it.
First, we've explored the idea that top-down peace, the work of bureaucrats, the signing of treaties, the efforts of interventionistas, often fails because it lacks skin in the game. And in fact, it often makes things worse by disrupting natural, self-correcting feedback loops.
Second, we learned about the safari effect, or the lion problem. Our brains are wired to see the one dramatic lion and ignore the 1,000 peaceful impalas. We think the world is more violent than it is because we mistake the lurid and salient for the statistical and empirical.
And third, we debunked the myth that centralization and stability always equals safety. As we saw with the example of Italy, sometimes a messy, decentralized chaos is safer for the average person than a forced unity that builds up pressure for a catastrophic black swan event like a world war.
The ultimate takeaway seems to be, trust the shopkeeper more than the diplomat.
Or at least understand that the shopkeeper and the barber and the farmer are the ones actually building the peace, one transaction, one haircut at a time.
Now, we always like to leave you with a final provocative thought. And the source text actually ends with a teaser for the next chapter.
It does. It pivots to a totally new topic, religion.
Which seems like a complete left turn after all this talk of war and trade.
At first, yeah, but not if you follow the core logic. We've been talking nonstop about skin in the game. The source hints that our modern view of religion is wrong. We see it as just a set of beliefs or superstitions. But he argues it's really about skin in the game. It's about rationality and, crucially, risk-bearing.
So the question we want you to mull over is this. If true peace requires skin in the game, if it requires you to have something to lose, does true belief require the same? Can you really truly believe in something if you aren't risking anything for it?
That is the question. A belief without a cost. Is it really a belief at all?
Something to think about while you're eating your yogurt. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Until next time.